Welcome to Open Matters, an interview series designed to explore the intersection of open source and open standards with folks in our industry. I'm your host, Guy Martin, the Executive Director of OASIS Open. In today's discussion, we're going to revisit a previous topic from our show, cybersecurity. Given recent attacks like those on Colonial Pipeline, as well as SolarWinds and other intrusions on critical infrastructure, plus the government interest in the form of presidential executive orders in the US and other legislation worldwide, we thought it was important to dive into some of the work going on here at OASIS that can help in this fight. Joining me today are two guests who are positioned at the nexus of this fight to defend against these kind of cybersecurity breaches. Rich Struess is director of the Center for Threat-Informed Defense within MITRE and also serves on our board here at OASIS Open. Rich, always good to chat with you. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Trey Darley is a systems and security architect at CERT.be in Belgium. Trey, it's a pleasure to meet you finally after seeing the results of all of your work on the CTI Technical Committee. Appreciate you joining us today as well.
Thank you, Guy. Appreciate you having me.
Great. So together, Rich and Trey are co-chairs for the OASIS Open Cyber Threat Intelligence Technical Committee, which is the group responsible for the STIX and TAXII standards work. The Structured Information Threat Expression Standard, or STIX, defines a language for sharing structured threat intelligence in a consistent machine-readable manner, which allows companies to anticipate and respond to attacks faster and more effectively. The companion standard that goes along with this is called the Trusted Automated Exchange of Intelligence Information, also known as TAXII, and that is the transportation protocol specifically designed to support the exchange of STIX data over Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. So with all of those definitions out of the way, let's go ahead and dive in. Rich and Trey, can you give us a little history on the origins of STIX and TAXII, what led to the creations of these standards, and who are your major stakeholders?
Yeah, well, it's always good to start with an origin story, and we won't have any X-Men or mutants, but the origin of STIX and TAXII actually goes all the way back to 2011. I had spent most of my life as a technology entrepreneur, writing systems in communications, and I found myself now at the Department of Homeland Security, just in a sort of a new chapter of my life in the cybersecurity division. And I was given a call one day by a colleague who actually turns out works MITRE, Rob Simmons, who said, "Hey, Rich, are you going to such and such meeting tomorrow?" And I said, "No, I have no clue," and didn't hear anything about it. He said, "Well, given what I know about you," because we had worked together earlier in that year, he said, "I think you should go." Well, fast forward to the next day, I go to this meeting, and there were a bunch of cybersecurity executives and government people all talking about the problem that people can't share actionable cyber threat intelligence in anything close to near real time. And I had been in this space coming from the software assurance perspective. So sort of cyber operations was new to me. And I left that meeting saying, "What do you mean there's no way to get information about indicators of compromise from point A to point B without humans being involved emailing PDFs?" And that set in progress some events. I went to my leadership at that time, very enlightened leadership, Carlos Kazee and Jenny Mena ultimately, and said, "I have an idea for a problem I want to tackle." And they said, "Go for it." And in January of 2012, I said, "You know what, we're going to solve this problem because there are not adequate international standards in the space. We're going to create a new standard to really solve this problem, to create a rich exchange of actionable cyber threat intelligence. We're going to handle both the data representation and the transfer mechanism." The little fun fact, there was originally only something called TAXII, and that was both the representation and the transport. And it was actually Sean Barnum from MITRE who came up with the name Stixx sometime later in 2012. But ultimately, it was an operational need that was being felt not just by government, but by the private sector, and not just the private sector here or government here, but around the world. And we set out to address that operational need.
Trey, you probably have something to add there as the co-chair.
Well, I think I got dragged into this venture somewhere in 2013. When did the first version of Stixx get published? Which remind me?
There was a less than 1.0 version that was published in 2012. I think 0.7 maybe, or 0.
So it was either 2012 or 2013, and it was sort of like right around the DEF CON Black Hat, sort of hype machine. And at that time, I was working with Splunk as the security strategist, something or other, helping to do sort of proof of concept implementations for new features that they can add to their security products. And my team lead at that time sort of just handed things out to people, and he gave me this thing, cyber threat intelligence. And I remember seeing sysadmins when I was knee-high to a fleet taking a CSV file on an old Unix system, like putting that stuff in their packet filters. And when I come back to this problem space as an adult, it's like people are still shipping CSVs around. Anyway, I really connected with the work. Like it was obviously a great opportunity to automate a lot of manual practices through a standard like STIX and TAXII. And I guess I came along complaining as somebody trying to implement, pulling my hair out. And at some point, I think there were a number of early decisions that, I'm sure, Rich, if you had a time machine, you go back and do some things differently from the beginning. But there were some pretty key success factors. And one of them was like sort of DHS coming out with these XML-based standards. And I'm talking about Stixx 1. But, they could have just said, like, here it is. And if you want to do business, if you want to have a government contract, you need to implement these. But very early on, there were mailing lists, and then there were these sort of monthly community calls that got to be quite lively. And then, like, for Rich, and I know you were supported by senior management. I don't want to name names because I'll probably name some of the wrong names, but to have this then be let go and given over to OASIS and to the care of basically that same community, just moved over from joining phone calls run out of DHS reminder to OASIS.
Awesome. So, I mean, that kind of gives us a little bit of the history of the origin and what this was all about. So as you put this together, who kind of were the major stakeholders that ended up being the people? Obviously you had a target audience for this, but was it sysads? Was it ISVs? Was it who were the kind of the major stakeholders?
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the first things I learned in being, and the government was a new and strange thing for me. And one of the things that I had an instinct early on, though, is if I pursued this quest to try to solve this problem, through the lens just of government, government played a key role. DHS, obviously invested significant resources and continues to invest significant resources to this day in support of these standards, and they deserve the community's thanks. But I had an intuition that if we just framed this as come help us try to solve DHS's problem or the US government's problem or government's problem, that wasn't going to get much traction, because the reality is, even though governments spend a lot of money compared to what the private sector spends, it's usually not considered worthwhile for people to create whole bespoke technology foundations for. So with that intuition, I reached out very early on, and my colleague and dear friend, my colleague at the time, and dear friend Tom Millar, who then was at US CERT and who is at CISA today, who, by the way, another fun fact, is the guy who came up with the name Taxi. We were sitting in an office. We had just had a colleague tell us a truly awful name that they had come up with for the standard, or for the specification. I want to be clear, they were just specifications. And Tom looked at me and I looked at Tom, and Tom said, trusted, automated, exchange, and he went through the TAXII, and in 90 seconds we had a name. But we started to reach out immediately to private sector organizations. The FSISAC was a great partner, and at the time, Aaron Chernin, who was leading up some of the working groups inside of FSISAC, he was then at DTCC and went on to fame at Soltra and then at Perch. But Aaron played a key role as really a community cheerleader within the financial sector. And once the big banks started to care, then that got others to care. And then we had people from literally around the world interested in this. And one of the phenomena that I noticed relatively early that told me this strategy was working is I would get phone calls from cybersecurity product managers saying, Rich, my sales team just got back from a visit with a customer, and they were asked what our STIX TAXII strategy is, and our salespeople didn't know what to say. And so that demand signal was really important to sort of make the industry stand up and say, this is something people care about. And and Trey, you're right. There are lots of things I would do very differently, but that's one that I would do exactly the same way, because I think when standards are informed by the users of those standards, not just the vendors of products and services that are going to implement them, but by people who are actually going to have to live with these things and use them on a daily basis, integrate them into their processes, I think you get a really different perspective. And that's something I think that worked really well, both when it was a DHS-led initiative and then in 2015 when we moved it over to OASIS.
Yeah, that sounds like it. I mean, Trey, I presume you're nodding your head, so I presume you're agreeing with pretty much everything.
I'm remembering things from, slightly on the other side, because after Splunk, then I started working for FSISAC and working with Soltra even before it became a company, before it had a name. And being involved with, there was this sort of a churn at that time of a lot of activity around cyber threat intelligence focused on STIX I and STIX II. And it was like also at that time, as we had completed the move, the migration, donation, whatever, of the standards from, specifications from DHS to OASIS, and deciding to take this greenfield approach and to say, let's build a minimum viable product. Let's try to follow some different design principles. And Rich, I don't want to just ramble on here, but I recall the face-to-face in Tampa. It was it not? In that would have been beginning 2016 or
2016.
And we had a hearty debate, and we looked at at the best of our ability within the ISACs and whatnot. There were some utilities that got coded up that could be run to analyze the trusted pool of data and just report back anonymized statistics about how STIX was actually being used in these organizations. Sort of focusing our efforts on let's make it easier for people to interact with the things that they're using most commonly. And then we got from there to STIX II, which was that MVP, but there were certain critical pieces that were missing. And we stand at this inflection point today. Maybe,
Yeah,
Rich,
I
we
mean,
can talk about some of the.
well, yeah, actually, I mean, Trey, I think
I'm
that's
thinking
a
it's
great.
off the outline.
Yeah, no, I know it's fine. So I think that's a great segue because I wanted to talk. I know you folks have a major release coming up, and you know, I've heard words bandied about like historical or you know, really, really critical and important release. So, what's new in this major release that's coming up, and why is it so important?
So what, you know, the historic event is that STIX 2.1 and TAXII 2.1, the latest versions of the STIX and TAXII standards were just ratified as full OASIS standards by OASIS membership. And what that does is that gives these specifications that have been implemented now by myriad organizations, the imprimatur, not just of yeah, this group of people thinks it's good, but it is now risen to the level through the OASIS process. And now because of OASIS relationship with other international standards bodies, we finally arrived at sort of the, you know, the varsity team. You know, we are there, and these standards can now be referenced in government procurement and regulation. Because of the reciprocity agreements between OASIS and other standards bodies. And this is the culmination of many, many years of work by many people in the TC. And they deserve a huge, thank you for all of the countless time and energy that they've put into these. But what it means is that, you know, for a long time, it was a running joke about, well, you know, is STIX 2 going to be ready? Well, it's going to be ready in 2018 or 2019. And we had great intentions, but, you know, and this is a lesson learned. Maybe we can come back and talk about in a bit. It took a long time to get, we had 2.0, STIX and TAXII 2.0, but then 2.1 took a lot longer than we wanted. But now as a TC, I think, and as a community, we have a really solid foundation for the community to go out, as I said, and start to use these. As I said on a TC call last week, the goal is not to publish a standard. The goal is not to write some spec, and you know, the goal is that we promulgate this this mechanism to achieve interoperability, and then people use that to actually improve their cybersecurity. That's the goal. The other stuff is a means to an end, but the goal is that, you know, whether it's the Belgian foreign ministry or, you know, a major US bank or a Japanese manufacturer, that they're able to the extent they want to, share actionable cyber threat intelligence in near real time with people to help them be more secure. So I've always emphasized, it's now, we have to keep our eye on the prize. And so for the TC, while our work is done in the specification for 2.1, there's still work being done, and work that will continue to promote the interoperability of the specs. We're going to pick up and start again our Plug Fest series to get different vendors of solutions to be able to ensure that they have interoperability out of the box. So it's a really exciting time. It's a huge achievement that everyone in the CTITC should be very proud of the work they've done.
And breathe a sigh of relief.
With a sigh of relief. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, so I mean, Trey, do you have anything to add to that? It's kind of, you know, from the implementation standpoint, it sounds like it was a big, heavy lift. And I have a follow-up question on that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on just where it's come from.
There were so many people who contributed so much to these, to make the 2.1 standards a reality. And I'm not going to try to name names, but as Rich was talking, I just couldn't help it sort of flash through memories of certain debates. I think we had so many discussions about release scope that we had meetings about what could be the scope of a meeting about release scope. I mean, we got down some rabbit holes, and then we got really close to the finish line. 3 or 4 times, I thought, dang it, like it's in the bag. And then the next thing I know, it'd be 18 months later, and I'm scratching my head going like, honestly,
Yeah.
at some points I questioned whether it was worth it. But in the end, we managed to wrap our hands around some of the thorniest issues, and I think really made the standard. We built on the foundation that we had before, but we really future-proofed it in a lot of ways and opened up to a lot of other use cases.
Yeah.
Maybe the biggest one to me is the extension mechanism that we built in. They're driving. Some things committees are more effective at than others. I do not want a committee to help me bake my daughter's birthday cake. I'll do that better by myself. So now in 2.1, there is a standardized mechanism for saying like, you need an object to describe, this aspect of cyber threat intelligence, and it's not within the data model. Fine. Or you need to add some additional properties to an existing sort of domain object or something like this. Like, fine. There's an easy interoperable way that's written into the spec for how you can do that. You can make that available as a contribution on an OASIS open project. If you sign the contributor license agreement, or in a variety of other ways. But the idea being, like, instead of, say, 6 months from now, the TC says we want to start working on STIX 2.2, instead of, okay, now we're going to spend 18 to 36 months like churning through discussions about not just what we're doing, but also what are we in consensus that the target is. That instead, with this extension mechanism, folks will just go out there and find a small group and in consensus, develop and evolve a solution to particular problems. And then in some cases, contribute those back to the TC, where the TC can just sort of look at a certain point in time, we have a tranche of additional capabilities that are vouched for by all these organizations. And it seems solid. So we can skip over a whole lot of the banter and just cut a release based on a tranche of vetted capability. So that's something that I'm pretty excited about in 2.1.
Cool. Well, I mean, hearing both. Oh, go ahead, Rich.
Because Trey talking about the challenges of working within a formal standards body really, it sort of reminded me of a point that I think is really critical. These specifications started life as DHS initiative, and no matter how many times I told people that we were trying to be open and whatever about this, and we were going to work globally, at the end of the day, everyone said, "Yeah, but you work for the U.S. government," and at the time, and if you change your mind or whatever, you can just, there's no stability, there's no guarantee. And they were right. I mean, those early days was that the STIX TAXII until 2015 was a beneficent dictatorship. And I was the beneficent dictator. And I think more often than not, I was pretty beneficent. But it became clear that we needed to find a new home for these specifications. And I did want to say that process, and I had never really heard of OASIS before. We actually went through a whole formal process where we did an internal evaluation of options. And then we actually brought in an outside group to do an analysis of standards development organization options. And we looked at all the usual suspects. And what was interesting is when we came back, I remember the meeting, and the outside consultant and we compared our notes. We had independently both settled on OASIS Open as the venue to contribute, for DHS to contribute the initial intellectual property to, and for us to charter a TC. And so that turned out, in retrospect, to be a great decision. I'm very happy with that. However, I would say, in part because of some of the challenges we had around timing, if we had had OASIS Open projects in 2015, that's what I would have done. because I think we were a little early, because we had decided, we had learned a lot from STIX and TAXII 1.x. We learned a lot of pain points, a lot about complexity, a lot about XML. And what I wish we had the option to do is to form an OASIS open project and start iterating as a small community, get that MVP, and then turn it into a formal work product. And I think anyone in the community today who is at that similar point, I just recommend to look at the at OASIS Open Project as a mechanism to then achieve their ultimate goal, maybe of creating a formal standard. But we didn't have that back then, so we had to set up stuff through it. But so, I wouldn't have done it, but I'd still make the same decision.
So it's interesting. Apparently, you're reading my mind from back there on the East Coast, because I was going to ask the question of, I'm hearing both of you talk about the challenges that of getting everybody on the same page, and the challenges of doing these releases, and 18 to 36 months. And you both know, or at least Rich, I know you know, that I come from the open source world primarily. I have a little bit of standards experience, but I come primarily from the open source world. And one of the reasons I was hired at OASIS, as you know, being on the board, was to try to bring that marriage of kind of the open source, and not just open sources in code, but open source methodologies and ways of working together with kind of the traditional standards, very careful, conservative, really focused on interoperability. So given that, and given that we've said publicly that my goal as executive director is to kind of bring us to this good merge and marriage between the two, where we kind of at some point don't have TCs and open projects, we just have projects, right? Kind of projects are projects. Given all of that, is there something that could have been done? And I am going off script here a little bit, so I apologize. Is there something that could be done in terms of the way that we have open projects and that governance model and the iterative approach to development of standards that could begin to shorten those timelines from 18 to 36 months down to something that is more akin to what an open source kind of development model looks like?
I guess I look at open projects in the governance model there. And I think that really would be a great fit. Again, if my time machine wasn't in the shop for repairs, I would hop right in it, dial it back to late 2014, early 2015, and we would set up an open project with some of the key stakeholders who had skin in the game, not just vendors, but the end users, and really sort of take it down to the foundation and rebuild it, but within a model that allowed us to be a lot more agile. There's the very, maybe what's the polite term? The very deliberate pace that progress is made in international formal standards development, is a feature and a bug, right? It's a bug when you're trying to get something done and you're all pretty sure you know the right thing to do. And it's a feature because sometimes you're not as sure as you think you are. And so you want to make sure.
If you're trying to stop something from being done.
Yeah, well, which is a really interesting point, because, standards, and if anyone is shocked by this, I apologize, but, standards bodies are known, or have been known in the past to be used as, they're like a battleground for companies who are waging war, my standard versus your standard. And, if we do this, that'll help my product. If we do that, that'll help your product. And one of the interesting observations, and this is why I'm so focused on the end user perspective, and I carry that forward today. On the center I run, we have both cybersecurity companies, but also a lot of end users, because they just don't bring some of that agenda to it. Their agenda is getting stuff done, making themselves more secure. And what I noticed looking back, as we were thinking about this milestone of full OASIS standard status, is that often some of the noisiest people in the end, when we looked at who actually came out with statements of use, which is part of the OASIS process, where an organization says, we have successfully implemented this specification or this standard. Some of the organizations that had had the noisiest representatives had no statements of use. And I'll let you draw your own conclusions. But, then there were people who were just always there with their, nose to the grindstone, helping us make progress. And they were smaller companies,
Our individuals.
And they were the ones with the first statements of use. And so I think keeping that perspective and being realistic about what people's interests are, and and why people get involved in standards, and therefore what's the right point at which you make something a formal standard and sort of lock in that more deliberate pace, is something I would encourage people to be mindful of.
Something practical that OASIS could do moving forward. I think that would make the life of any TC much smoother and make the standards process much more efficient. Would be if there was some sort of mandatory psychological baseline assessment before an individual were permitted to join the TC.
And if they pass
sort of
it,
a driver's
they
license.
Eligible. Because you have to be kind of crazy. And actually, that, if I may.
Just crazy enough, but not too crazy.
So speaking about just crazy enough, throughout this, I've been doing this the longest, 9.5 years. But I've always been doing this work because, with the support of my employer, right? Whether it was DHS and then MITRE Corporation. And that's true for I think the vast majority of our TC members, that, it's part of their job. Their employers pay them. Trey is one of those people who has really, as an individual for many years, labored and sacrificed, not because his employer was, supporting his time in the TC. Trey was doing that on his own, in his copious free time, which he has none of, and I really want to call Trey out for that, because there were years and years where Trey was literally funding his participation in this all on his own, and was at every call, and that kind of dedication is just noteworthy, and I want to thank you, Trey, for that. That's why one of the best gifts I got out of this TC is my friendship with Trey.
Same here.
Awesome.
But for me, I have to be honest. It was some great work back in the early days, but one of my strongest motivators, aside from I want the world to be a safe place for my daughter and other kids to grow up in, for me to grow up in, for that matter, I think about my younger self pulling my hair out trying to implement the earlier version, when it was a clear problem in front of me. I had a vision for what I was trying to achieve, but I just kept fighting with my tools in the form of some of the aspects of the standard. Through all this, in my mind, I think about sort of some mid-level software engineer somewhere getting a Jira task from their product manager to go implement this thing. How do I make this as easy as possible for that guy to get it right? And we've done a pretty good job. Nothing is perfect in STIX TAXII 2.1. Perfect they are not. But the lessons that we learned, going from 1 to 2, and the refinements that we brought in, coupled with the emphasis that we've had from early on interoperability, and having not just oh, you say you support this, great, let's, I think one thing we all three have in common is having been in computing back before robust interoperable TCP/IP stack was something that you could take for granted, much less even having cabling that might snap together, So these things aren't automatic, but I'm hopeful that with the work that the interoperability subcommittee is undertaken and carrying forward, that products out there will be carrying a STIX preferred, taxi preferred logo. That means something. That means that, you know, you as a sysadmin or somebody as a network engineer somewhere or a security engineer doesn't have to spend a bunch of time reverse engineering the APIs in two different products and writing some glue code to make them interoperate.
Right.
That's
right.
not the problem that people are there for.
Exactly. And, you know, hey, Trey, boy, you guys are right on it in terms of my segues for me. So I really appreciate that, because that actually gets to another thing I really want to talk about, which is, you know, clearly this is important work. We've talked about it, but can you give us some examples of sort of where this is being used, how it's being used? You know, obviously within the context of, you know, if you can't talk about a particular product using it, but just what kinds of products are being are using the standard or implementing this standard, be it a proprietary product, be it open source. How is this sort of being used in a way that gets you to that goal of making this world a safer place for your daughter and for you know, for all of us?
Yeah, I talk a lot about stealth implementations that aren't necessarily you know, well known, but you know, all of the major cybersecurity companies at this point leverage STIX and TAXII to for the exchange of indicators and things like the Cyber Threat Alliance. You know, Michael Daniels' organization, they do great work, and they've built a whole platform based on STIX too. So that's an example of, you know, this is ready for prime time. People are using it. There's one of the largest cloud security service providers whose entire back end on, you know, threat intelligence exchange is all based on STIX. You know, if you look at the statements of use that accompany the standard that just got released, you'll see major cybersecurity companies, you'll see some smaller cybersecurity companies. So I think you're seeing at this point, we're hopefully going from a time where we're talking about what should the standard look like, should I use it, to really now, how do I make best use of it in my environment? And you know, one of the things I think consumers of threat intelligence can start doing is asking their vendors of threat intelligence, whether it's provider of a threat intelligence feed or some other service, what their, you know, STIX and TAXII roadmap is. You know, are they, you know, if they currently support STIX 2 and in particular STIX 2.1 and TAXII 2.1, great. If not, what's it on there? You know, what's their roadmap? And this is where I want to make sure everyone understands their full, complete international standards that are not going to change. Will the CTITC create, you know, follow-on versions over time? Will there be a STIX 2.2 and TAXII 2.2? Maybe. It's not clear exactly when that might happen. Or will there be a STIX 3? Maybe down the road. But we have a foundation for interoperability in place that's going to be in place in perpetuity because of the way OASIS operates. So don't let your vendors say, oh, they're still those things are still in flux, or we're going to wait for it to settle down. It's settled down. They're full OASIS international standards. What's your roadmap, vendor? And that's what I hope consumers start to do.
You know, there was a time, there was a sort of a hype curve some years ago where featuring STIX and TAXII blazoned across some, well, software used to come in a box, you know, that would be something that a marketing department might try to lead with. But imagine like Microsoft Office 2022 now featuring UTF-8, you know, don't even think about that, but you just assume it. So I'm really hopeful that we'll start to see new classes of applications being built on top of, like MITRE ATT&CK. Arguably, MITRE ATT&CK could have happened without STIX and TAXII, but there has been a very happy marriage, I think, there. And you can think about ATT&CK as being something like an application on top of STIX and TAXII, and one could imagine a whole host of new classes of security countermeasures or tools sort of riding on top of that. And my hope is, in the same way that like kids today think of the internet doesn't even equal like a website, it equals an app. It's like, you know, an abstraction of a website. That all that network stuff is just magic. That STIX and TAXII solve a problem and they disappear. That would be my dream.
That would be your dream. So, I mean, kind of to your point, almost like, you know, our son, we were talking to him about websites, and, you know, there's this thing called HTTP. He's like, I don't care. I just go to the website, right? So it's kind of the same thing. I don't care about STIX and TAXII. I just know that this threat information just gets shared, and my stuff is secure.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
But we ain't quite there yet.
right. Yeah. I mean, the goal is not that every security analyst out there is familiar with the data model, the JSON schema for STIX, or the, you know, HTTP message structure for TAXII. It's really, you know, we are just trying to create this ecosystem, and I think we've just passed a significant milestone where the technology is no longer the barrier to actually exchanging information. Now, the barriers that exist are arguably more difficult, you know, and they're about people or policy or people being risk adverse or what's in it for me. But I think we've done the part that we can do well in giving the community a good set of interoperable tools that are relatively easy to implement. They're scalable and extensible to actually represent the kind of threat intelligence that people care about. And when I started this, I was all focused on indicators. It was indicator. And in fact, TAXII used to be the trusted automated exchange of indicator information. And it was only some number of years ago that first I became intelligence. But things, Trey mentioned MITRE ATT&CK. MITRE, by the time people hear this broadcast, MITRE ATT&CK will be available as STIX 2.1. So I think we're going to see more and more of that because there have been so many people, and this TC has been a global effort, which, like everything else, is a feature and a bug. So feature because we got perspectives from people from Japan and Europe and all over the Far East, North America. The bug is, of course, we had to schedule meetings at all times of the day or night. But in the end, it was worth it because we have a standard. I will say that one of the things that was baked into STIX 2 for as part of this being a true global standard is full support for internationalization and localization of content. So don't let that be a barrier to implement either.
Awesome.
I think I think we're at a really interesting inflection point right now. If you look at some of the official communiques that came out of the last NATO summit, I think was it last week. If you look at what's going on with the proposal for the second NIS directive that was put forward as a draft by the Commission back in December, and if you look at let's say multilateral and bilateral dialogue, which by the time you've seen this video will have transpired around issues pertaining to cybersecurity, we're at a sort of unique inflection point, both I think within the common public discourse and within sort of geopolitical, diplomatic at that level. Having these standards for information sharing coming out as full OASIS standards at this same inflection point where there's such a drive toward more flexible, faster information sharing to shut down some of the jerks with the computers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's also another great segue to kind of the last area I really wanted to cover, which is, clearly cybersecurity is top of mind a lot more lately because of the technology, the increase in use of technology in the era that we're still in with COVID, so much so that U.S. President Biden signed an executive order to help secure the software supply chain. And I know, Trey, there's European things going on. it's a kind of a two-part question. One is, how does STIX and TAXII sort of fit into that overall ecosystem of helping our software supply chain and kind of the operations piece? And also, you've pointed out the thing that this really is a borderless problem, right? I mean, it's not like we just have these issues in the US or in Europe. How does something like STIX and TAXII begin to, obviously it's giving the people the tools, but what's the community aspect? What's the things that we really have to get past from a policy and governmental standpoint to allow this effective interchange of information?
People who are existing in organizations where the organizational culture pushes them toward covering their butts instead of sharing information, then there's no standard that can affect that kind of cultural change. That's the big issue.
The thing I'd say though is that, and no offense to my friends and colleagues, in government, but I think one of the things that has held us back for a long time is this idea that it's government who has all of the cool data and the best data and the richest data, super secret squirrel club kinds of things, and that there are places and times and places where that is critically important. But the vast majority of cyber threat intelligence is actually, generated, managed, provided, consumed by private sector organizations. So, while I think government can play an important role in sort of pointing people in a direction, ultimately, this has to be the private sector stepping up and saying, if there's sources of intelligence that we can leverage, whether it's through an ISAC or an ISAO, or through a threat intelligence vendor, or through bilateral sharing agreements with peers or competitors or my supply chain, they should be able to do that. I think STIX and TAXII gives people that technological foundation that hopefully, but you don't buy STIX and TAXII, you buy products, or you acquire open source capabilities that implement STIX and TAXII. So I'm hoping that people, definitely take a page from the government and try to say, okay, this seems like it's an important thing, but we don't have to wait for the government to tell us what to do.
Right.
And so much great intelligence is on everyone's endpoint and in everyone's proxy. There's a lot of important information that, appropriately anonymized and sanitized and shared for the right reasons with the right people can make a big impact.
Right. I mean, I think about sort of the fact that OASIS has, two of our colleagues, Dr. Carol Cosgrove-Sachs and Pim van der Eyck, work on kind of on the European side, and with OASIS forming our new OASIS Open Europe Foundation. I would love to see us find a way to kind of, like you said, go beyond the technology, go beyond the specification, and actually enable these communities to have these conversations. And it's kind of having worked a little bit in government, like you did, Rich, that there's this seeking, asking permission versus
and like I do.
And like you do, right?
I work in the office of the Prime Minister.
Oh, well, so this problem, right? Seeking permission versus asking for forgiveness later. And I think there's a point there that we have to get to where we are saying, hey, this data needs, like you said, appropriately anonymized, et cetera, but this data needs to be shared because it's a problem that's affecting everybody, right? And I know that having sort of the stamp of the government saying, yeah, this is okay to do this, and hey, let's share this is one thing, but how do we get past that? I mean, it sounds like you kind of want to say, what's in it for me for all of these consumers of this cyber threat intelligence? What's in it for them, and how do they talk to sort of companion organizations or even competitors? How do we enable that community, I guess, is what I'm asking, to share that information?
Honestly, I think so much of that has to be driven, I mean, to Trey's earlier point, so that people aren't even aware of it. Obviously, they need to authorize it, but, you use that major clouds service provider, they're helping keep you more secure using Stixx, right? Stixx 2. So I think that needs to be our model. Trying to get everyone in the world to understand what STIX and TAXII are is not the answer. Right. But it's getting people who are in key points, whether it's the person, the CISO who is evaluating threat feeds, or the person doing a major acquisition of a security capability, making sure the more people demand and ask for interoperable CTI solutions based on international standards, specifically STIX and TAXII 2.1, the more we'll just create an ecosystem where you don't have to ask for it. Like it just happens. It just happens by default.
Hey, Rich, I got this document in UTF-8. Do you know where I can get a program that can help me open that?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like you don't want to be the last text editor with your users clamoring for you to implement STIX and TAXII.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. By the way, Guy, we've talked about OASIS a lot. And I just, before we run out of time, we have had I have certainly had the honor and privilege of working with all of you in OASIS, for the last 6 years and now serving on the board. We would not be where we are today if it weren't for the capable. We thank the TC and their volunteers, and they've done the vast majority of the technical work on the standards. But one of the key things about an organization like OASIS is it's that process and rules and all those things that keep the trains running on time. And if it weren't for people who now I call good friends, Carol Geyer and Jane Harnett and Dee Shore, Chet Ensign, who knows the answer to every last question ever asked about international standards, Scott McGrath, and now yourself. It's been a real pleasure. We literally would not be where we are today if it weren't for the sort of community mindedness and the very sort of let's solve this problem kind of attitude that OASIS has brought to the table. Yeah. So just on behalf of myself, just a huge thanks to everyone at OASIS.
Yeah,
Yes.
Thanks. It's I really appreciate that. So as of this episode, I've been here for a year and 5 months. So obviously, I am. I agree with all of that, right? I mean, the reason I came to OASIS, and I've said this before, people in kind of my open source community circle were like, "You're going to an SDO? That sounds like a strange career move, given all of your stuff, running open source program offices and companies." And I said, actually, I think it's a great place to be because it's this marriage of open source and standards, and specifically OASIS because of the way they've done standards, right? In this very open, collaborative, transparent, neutral way I think was a great fit. So we appreciate that. All of my staff is going to be great. Is going to be very happy to hear that from you. So with that, let's go ahead and wrap it up. We are running a little long, but I think this has been a great conversation. So I want to give you both kind of an opportunity, final thoughts, comments, anything you want to leave people with in terms of STIX and TAXII and the evolution of that work in cybersecurity.
We have had some influx of new members in the TC. And if you're out there looking at this video right now and you think that if you're involved at all in implementing, try to see with your boss if your organization can join OASIS and come join the CTITC. We have not solved all the problems. We've barely begun to scratch the surface, but we need you to come and help. And don't be intimidated to come and work on a standard. It's an open environment, and we're looking for fresh, energized blood, new ideas. So come on over, help us make it better.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Rich?
and on that note, I would say that I've announced to the TC that with this work complete, I'm stepping down as CTITC co-chair, and it is because of the strength of this community, because of the strength of the TC and the people in it, and because of folks like Trey Darley, that I'm confident not only will the TC continue to do good work, they'll do work that I couldn't even imagine. And so that's, I think, the message about what an organization like OASIS does in open collaboration, because it gives us the ability to really create these scalable and sustainable communities where like-minded, passionate people coming from all sorts of different walks of life for different reasons can come together and tackle a problem. So, you know, that's been a huge honor and privilege of mine. You know, when I left that meeting, you know, almost 10 years ago, and said, we got to do this. I never thought we would end up at this place at this point in time. And it's been a great ride. And you know, if I could, I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat. But let's never lose sight of the fact that this is a means to an end. And so my challenge to everyone, and maybe this can be a subject at an upcoming Borderless Cyber event, you know, how we're using STIX TAXII 2.1 to secure our organization or our sector or our country. I think we really need to be very much focused on not just, you know, fussing with the standards, but actually using them to solve real cybersecurity problems.
I would also like to thank my organization, the Center for Cybersecurity Belgium, for supporting the work of CTICC through allowing my participation in OASIS. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Sorry.
Trey.
Just cut
no
that in
worries.
somewhere, please.
No worries. Okay, so then I'll get this last bit in. Thanks, Rich and Trey. It was really awesome to get both of your perspectives on the broader issues of cybersecurity in general, but also the important work that you're both doing in the CTI Technical Committee, and how that could be a significant part of helping thwart future cyber attacks. So thank you both again very much for joining me today and sharing this critical information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. So if you want to learn more about the STIX and TAXII work we've been discussing today, or any other OASIS projects, you can find us at oasis-open.org. Let's continue the conversation on Twitter. We're at OASIS Open. And once again, everybody, until next time, thanks for listening.